I also like to thank you for inviting me to make this presentation. Unfortunately, I had a very short notice for taking part in this. So you will, I hope, excuse me if you think that my presentation is somewhat sketchy, and I will actually also try to be very brief. And what I'll try to do is to lay out some issues which I think we need to keep in focus when we are thinking about the problems faced by DNT communities, whom we have come together these very difficult times. So firstly, a very broad kind of point that I would like to make is that when we address the challenges faced by such a marginal segment of the Indian society, it may be important to ask at the very outset, and this would be true, I guess, of um, uh, discussion about any marginal community in Indian context. We may ask whether in addressing their developmental challenges, uh, can we think about them without addressing the overarching development paradigm and development model that we are living by in our society? Can we really address the problems faced by marginal groups like the denotified communities without without sort of realigning our overall developmental and economic, political, and social priorities? Uh, so this is a question I think we should ask as a very sort of broad question, because often we tend to talk about groups, but we don't challenge the broader frameworks within which we are moving, and which may be so much implicated in the problems that are being faced by marginal communities in our society. Uh, of course, at the same time, we do need to look at the specific issues which confront such communities, and that's what I think we are trying to do over here today. So in the first place, so let's try to do this while keeping in mind that a lot of these issues can't really be addressed without realigning our overall development paradigm, which is why a lot of these things don't really end up doing very much, because we don't have a control over a lot of things. So, but let's focus upon denotified communities, which I would say are one of the most marginal segments of Indian society. It's not the only marginal segment, but it is one of the most marginal segment. As Professor Thorat also mentioned, um, they are called denotified because they were notified under the Criminal Tribes Act during the colonial period, in which an act which was brought out in 1871. There's a whole history of that act and its consequences, which has been very well documented in Indian context. And they were subsequently post-independence. In fact, 5 years after independence, they were denotified. That is to say that the uh, Criminal Tribes Act was sort of repealed, and those people who had been notified under the act were now the so-called denotified communities. Often we also talk of nomadic communities under the same rubric of when we talk about denotified communities, because so it's not like denotified communities were not nomadic. Uh, there were many nomadic communities which were notified, but many which escaped notification for various reasons. And however, they also are, you can say, sailing in the same boat, or share many of the problems faced by the uh, so-called denotified communities, and therefore it makes sense to treat them under the same umbrella, which is how successive, you can say, commissions set up for these groups have also treated. How this is how the state also looks at them. So that's the broader umbrella within which we are looking at this category. And by some reckonings, this is almost like 10% of Indian population. Again, for various reasons which are very well known, we are not very we cannot give a figure to this population, but it's a reasonable estimate to say that it's a very, very large segment of Indian population. At the same time, it's a very heterogeneous section of the population. And this is something on which I want to briefly labor. So the heterogeneity of these people derives not only from those characteristics like their regional location, linguistic differences, religious affiliations, and livelihood strategies, but they also derive from their differential numerical sizes, different degrees of integration in the mainstream society, and the extent of their exclusion and marginality, which derives from a host of conditions. So this kind of heterogeneity also poses a serious challenge to any attempt to think about the ways in which we can address the problems of such a group under the same umbrella. So, this on the one hand, this umbrella should be large enough to hold such a group of people together. But at the same time, we must remind ourselves that it still seems that it's not large enough to sort of challenge the broader developmental paradigms which are willy-nilly implicated in the lives of everyone. So, this challenge of, like dealing with groups so large and so heterogeneous, but at the same time, not really being able to expand our paradigms beyond that is something which I think is useful to keep in mind. So we may ask whether it is useful to think about the DNTs. I mean, these are really questions, and I'm not saying, there is one answer, but I'm just posing these as questions so that we don't take these things as self-evident. So we may ask whether it's useful to think about the DNTs and NTs as a single group, or should we think of them as a number of different groups with different but overlapping interests? Can we identify the areas of this overlap more clearly in order to demarcate areas of common interest? So such a question is not necessarily is always asked in an intellectual or maybe policy oriented fora. But I think they cannot be ignored when we are faced with the plethora of not only very different conditions that such various constituents of such groups find themselves in, but also when we look at the very different strategies that they have adopted in order to find a place for themselves in the dominant social, economic, and political order. So these questions also arise again due to the official division of these groups into different categories like SC, ST, OBC, and a lack of a separate categorization. So the manner in which they have been put together in these groups, so not just that they are put in the group of SC in one state and ST in other, even within one state, different groups, different constituents of these groups have been put into different categories, and even a group which is, even district-wise, the same, let's say, a group with one name, maybe in one category in the one district, in another category in another district. So it's a very, very messy sort of categorization, and this sort of poses a challenge to, again, thinking of their problems under one rubric. So in this context, we could ask whether and how the DNTs, so apart from this question of whether they are all in one sort of a category and how so, and what are the difficulties of doing this, we can also ask whether and how they make a common cause with other marginal groups, such as the Dalits, for instance, since this is a discussion happening under the auspices of Indian Institute of Dalit Studies. I think that is a question we need to ask. Although they are, of course, I think there is a kind of alliance here, which is very important. So the question like this also arises again because of the politics of official classifications, but also as well because of the ways in which these identities are forged among many DNT communities, and the sort of sense of past wrong that they identify with, which may not be the same with other Dalit communities. So this history of the stigmatization under the Criminal Tribes Act and its continuing legacy is something which needs to be very seriously taken into account when we are thinking of DNTs. And then, as Professor Thorat said, that there is a recognition that there is something distinctive about the issues faced by these communities. So having said this, there is no doubt that there is merit in treating these groups under such a broader umbrella. As without the security of such a kind of overarching configuration, it may be very difficult to find any sympathetic hearing for the issues facing these people, nor provide them with any category to rally around. And in that sense, I think Tawkir was talking about indigenous groups, and I think they would. That's another question. I think it's not an easy sort of alliance or uh, subsumption under such a category that may be possible, considering the unique kind of historical legacy that DNT communities face. But it's again, it may be something which has some value to in thinking about. So if we now turn to considering what kind of challenges DNTs face, it may be useful to think along a multiplicity of axes, as the problems are manifold and solutions also need to be multi-pronged. So it is useful again to begin by identifying the set of issues faced by DNTs in terms of, I would suggest, political, legal, socio-economic, and socio-cultural sort of axis. Now, these need not really be neatly differentiated from each other. And there is, of course, the underlying historical backdrop, which provides a unifying thread to these different factors. I think it is useful for the purpose of analysis to tease them apart. This can also be useful for a debate and discussion on what is most significant for the purposes of policy making, and also expansion of our limited intellectual resources which are directed to addressing the issues of these people. And it's also kind of a framework to analyze the policies which are already available to us. So if we begin very briefly, I'll outline these three dimensions. If we begin with the political legal aspect, the most apparent and obvious issue of the DNT communities can, of course, be seen as deriving from the history of criminalization during the British period and its continuing repercussions. The consequences, and I'm going to be, very sketchy because of the shortage of time. But I could sort of expand upon these things if need be. The consequences of such a past are not limited to the effects it had during the period of its actual enactment, that is the Law Criminal Tribes Act, but its lasting sort of legacy, which has translated into, you can say, disguised laws which resonate the Criminal Tribes Act, such as the Habitual Offenders Act, policing practices, and of course the continuing incarceration, which is really not as well documented as it should be. So in fact, many, including myself, have shown in some of small works of mine that there is no official recognition of the extent to which such communities continue to be on the wrong end of the law and state. Indeed, when we discuss these groups in the context of development, as I just said, we must not forget that a lot of mainstream development practices, such as urbanization, beautification of cities, curtailing of traditional rights to resources such as forests, etc., have really added to the woes of many of these groups. Which is why I said that without looking at the larger paradigm, we may be unable to sort of address the issues of these people. It is also well known that such groups have been most excluded from citizenship rights. And indeed, the increasing need for documentation of identity proof, such as Aadhaar cards and voter cards, continue to elude large segments of these groups. And hence, this kind of exclusion happens at a very sort of elementary level. The issue of reservation and their messy inclusion and exclusion from the same is something which has already been flagged, and it is an important issue for these DNT communities, and it continues to be one which draws a lot of agitation and action on various fronts. And again, not a unified front; it can be multiple, sort of advocacies at different levels. So within the ambit of the political legal frame level, that we are talking about, we can also look at and assess the efficacy of various political and civil society attempts at addressing the issues of DNT communities. We may ask, how have the various commissions set up fared in addressing their problems? Uh, how have the legislators responded to these demands at various levels? And what are the various mobilizations which have partly been also, sort of as a response to these kind of recognition of their issues? So what kind of mobilizations have taken place? What are the issues that they seek to address? Have people taken recourse to legally challenging their condition, or are they taking recourse to extra legal attempts at finding solutions? So a lot of documentation actually remains to be done. As I see a lot of young people, I think in the audience here, there is a lot of work which needs to be done in order to highlight the kind of problems they face, as well as the kind of solutions that we have adopted. If we now look at the socioeconomic issues of these groups, the decimation of traditional or long-standing livelihood practices of these groups with the advent of modernity and the non-replacement of these kind of past livelihoods with any significant viable alternatives, you can say, stands at the heart of their dispossession and distress. That is evident vis-a-vis a very large segment of DNT communities. Of course, the impact of this economic modernization has undoubtedly been differential. It has happened at different points of time for different segments of DNT and nomadic communities. But a better assessment of the complexities of such marginalization, which is continuing at various levels, and the ways in which these communities deal with it is, sometimes by recourse to practices which are also deemed criminal even today. It remains a matter of further research and clarification. Again, the state policies, including those related to reservation, as well as civil society attempts, need to be assessed in light of their ability to address the economic marginalization of the DNT communities. And I think this should be treated as very urgent. Further, how such policies differentially impact different constituents of DNT communities is also something we may want to think about, considering that we are dealing with a very heterogeneous group. So, for instance, the question of reservation, or, should it be something else? So we need to then think of what kind of policies need to be devised, which would be able to address the problems of the most marginal among these marginal groups, because, it's also a stratified group. Now, under the head of socio-cultural, uh, sort of problems, we can think about the issues of social exclusion and stigma, which continue to be an everyday experience of members of these communities. So in many cases, this has also imposed or even encouraged insulated lifestyles, further exacerbated by the ghettoized conditions in which many of these people who lack any kind of land rights, or any kind of access to land in many conditions. I mean, most of them have settled down. They don't remain nomadic, but settling down has not been easy. It's another kind of nomadism, forced nomadism, that has been imposed on many groups. So the consequences of such marginality for intra-community relationships, for instance, between men and women, the role of this kind of marginality in reinforcing harmful social practices such as community enforced sanctions remains to be fully appreciated. And in fact, some of these things can end up putting them on the wrong side of the law again. So that there is both disdain and apathy towards members of such communities is also apparent from the regular use of their community names as bad words. There is no concerted effort to create better awareness towards the plight of such people, DNT communities, through either literary or educational practices. The contributions, such as those of the Budhan theater, writers such as Mahashweta Devi or Lakshman Gaikwad, are notable, but perhaps only a small drop in the ocean considering the extent of the problem. So what kind of work needs to be done to ensure social inclusion of such communities at the social level also needs to be therefore given a serious thought. So what I have presented above is a really brief and sketchy outline of how I think we could proceed with an analysis of the questions facing the DNT communities. It is a broad framework, and I guess it probably raises more questions then it seeks to answer. It should be modified, it should be made more rigorous, but I think it will help us in thinking about the solutions which are being devised or which have already been devised, and at least be more explicit about the priorities which we have set in place, and whether or not we have done justice in that sense. Finally, apart from considering the viability of solutions that have been devised to address the problems of such groups within the Indian context, it may also be worthwhile to consider what kinds of solutions have been adopted in other parts of the world. I mean, this is again I would say, work to do, and whether there are any success stories which we can really emulate. Given that we are addressing a very complex problem, such as the one at hand, it's not too much to say that all options must be explored and kept open. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, now we request Ms. Disha Wadekar. Yeah. Disha, yeah.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm a lawyer and I've worked with denotified communities, and I'm going to take this opportunity to actually talk about, the criminal justice administration, the criminal justice system, the Indian Constitution,